So what I'm going to do is go through the session as if it's one of the sessions that I'm running, but it'll be obviously focused on the key topics that we're interested in rather than focused on neuroscience, which is what I'm teaching. So hopefully there'll be an opportunity as well for us to get a few ideas together as well, because I think, you know, one of the key aspects of all of this, you know, blended learning process is that we're all learning from each other. And, you know, there are lots of bits and pieces of good practice that people have been doing that perhaps haven't been shared with others, and also there are things that people have maybe tried that haven't worked so well. So I think this would be a really good opportunity to get some of those ideas down. So we will be using the whiteboard in a little while as well to sort of have some group activity, if you like. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a quiz. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I always start sessions like this, and I will explain why in a little while. But what I'm going to do, you're going to need your mobile phones for this, I'm afraid. So hopefully everybody's got a smartphone. So if you could possibly go to joinmyquiz.com and type in the join code you see before you, then we can get the quiz started. You will be given a name, and it won't be your real name. It will be a name that the quiz decides for you, and there'll be a leaderboard, so you'll be able to see how you're getting on during the course of the quiz. So I can see nobody's joined yet, so I shall wait until I see people joining. Oh, there we go. That pop means somebody has joined, which is exciting. Some of the names are fantastic, I must say. How many people do we have in the session altogether? Because my little dial's disappeared. Just so I know when everyone's joined.
16. 16,
okay, cool. So I've got 6 at the moment. If anyone's not going to do it, perhaps you could write in the chat, because then we'll know when. But I would say everyone should do it, because it's a good quiz. I wrote it myself, and I think it's an excellent quiz. I could also put a link in the chat. Let me just find the chat here in case anyone's having any trouble getting on.
A couple of people saying they're having technical issues.
Yeah, you can click on that. Yes. So yeah, if you write the joinmyquiz.com, and then it will just ask you for a join code. I'll wait for a couple more, and then we'll get started. The beauty of this is people can join at any time. So even when we started the quiz, people can still join. And that's part of the reason why I do it, because we often have latecomers to the session. And this is a good way of the first 10 minutes of the session going without people dropping in and out and losing the track of what's going on. Okay, so I've got 12 people signed up now. So I'd say that's probably about right. Yeah, so we'll start the quiz now, because obviously we don't want this to take the whole session. So when I press start, the quiz will start on your phone. I'm going to mute myself, because otherwise the new music gets a bit much. So Right, I've now ended the quiz. So congratulations to, Akai, yes. So you should have the final leaderboard now. So congratulations to Akai Athena. So I don't even know if I've pronounced that right, but fantastic effort there with 6,700 points. The way the points are allocated on this is for speed as well as accuracy. So if you were very confident in your answer, then you get more points. Obviously, this quiz was a bit of fun. Who made the quotes? Either Donald Trump, Homer Simpson, or Boris Johnson. Quite tough quiz, as you'll have seen, which probably says more for those people than the quiz itself. So I always run these quizzes at the beginning of my sessions, obviously not typically about Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. They're usually about the topic for the week, but we always use quizzes as a way of kind of starting off the sessions. And that allows the people who are joining late really to make sure that they don't miss any of the important materials during the session. So normally I do a sort of 15-question quiz, which takes roughly 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning of the session, just to make sure that everybody gets in and gets on. The other good thing with this is that I can download all of the answers and the sheet with everybody's scores on it with their made up names, and I pop that on the Moodle site afterwards so that people can see what the quiz was and also see how they got on. So that's a normal part of my sessions. Okay. Right, so back to the matter in hand. So that was the quiz. So well done for everybody who did that. So really what I want to cover in this session, I've already kind of mentioned really what the session's going to be about. But I think what the idea of this workshop really is, firstly, to sort of discuss primarily synchronous online teaching. This new thing that we are all faced with, which is kind of replacing our lectures, if you like, and our only real, not face-to-face, but sort of, literal interaction with students in real time, and just share some of what, from my experience so far, has been working well, but also to get some feedback from others about things that might be working well and things that we can perhaps do differently. I also want to identify any challenges in student engagement. I have a few ideas and a few things that have worked well to encourage student engagement within my own sessions, and things seem to be working pretty well at the moment. But if other people have got other ideas about student engagement, again, that would be something that we could explore during this session. So really what the idea is to try to make sure that we're all in a good position to maximise engagement, but also obviously the student experience during these synchronous sessions, but also importantly for all of us, the sort of pedagogical potential. So, one thing that concerned me right from the start of all this is how we're going to best address the pedagogical challenges that we have with this blended and connected learning. And it's partly, what we include in these sessions and how best to kind of split the information up and not to repeat too much information, and to make sure that it's absolutely clear to the students what that kind of learning journey is through the module. So that's really what the aim of this session is. Obviously I put it as learning outcomes because that's what I would normally do within my my synchronous sessions. Right, okay. So the way we're going to do this, firstly, talk about structuring the session. So what I normally put within a session in order to encourage active engagement with the students. I think that term active engagement is absolutely key to this. Then I've got a few tips for increasing engagement within synchronous sessions, a few challenges that could be faced, and I think that's going to be more of a kind of chat with everybody, a workshop, and then how best to sort of try and put this into action with a kind of live feedback towards the end. So that's what I'm hoping to get through within this hour session. Okay, so in terms of how best to structure the sessions, for me, obviously, the idea is that we need to try and maximize sort of pedagogical impact. And so really what, in my view, the asynchronous sessions are to do, and obviously that's not the topic we're talking about today, but just to kind of get it clear in our heads what that is for. The asynchronous sessions are really designed to be student-centered, but instructor-led, but student-paced. So in other words, you can build your asynchronous materials, so it's instructor-led from that perspective, and you will take the students through those asynchronous activities at, in the kind of manner and structure that you want to do it. but it is very much student-paced and flexible. So the students are able to do that within their own time. And obviously, a lot of the different activities that we use for this, things like exercises, readings, videos, mini, vignettes, whatever it is we're doing, works well in order to ensure that we are able to deliver those sessions appropriately. And research on the sort of asynchronous route within the blended learning has shown that actually engagement depends on the quality of the learning path. In other words, how that kind of idea that the students start from a perspective of a basic understanding and go towards a sort of fuller understanding ready for assessment is really important. So the students need to understand what that learning path is, and depending on how good that learning path is, it really depends on what the engagement will be, according to research. Now, others have shown that actually a way of increasing student engagement with asynchronous learning is through using discussion groups and forums. And actually that really forms part of what, in my view, is important also for the synchronous sessions, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is ensuring that there is that constant kind of ability for the students to interact. It's not just about student voice, it's about allowing the students to interact with the coordinator of that module or the teacher on that module in order to ensure that there is that kind of dyadic learning experience for the students. And certainly for the asynchronous sessions, this is quite a tricky thing to do, because in order to do that, you have to engage, you have to use ways that students can discuss things within themselves, or forums and so on, and that can work really well. Again, today's session is more about the synchronous side of things. So really, we know what we need for the asynchronous sessions, and that's done to a reasonably good level. I think certainly within our school, it's being done really well at the moment. In terms of synchronous sessions, this is something that people have been struggling with in terms of coming up with content. I think one of the dangers of synchronous sessions is, I guess, falling into the trap that, well, essentially it's an online lecture. And the problem is with an online lecture is that it is very clear from research and from student feedback and from what we know that if you just talk to people for an hour or 2 hours online without that kind of feedback, they're not going to be engaged with the session. And actually the ability for them to learn anything from that session is very limited. I mean, one could argue that that's the case with live lectures anyway, but that's perhaps for a different day. So synchronous sessions, again, they're instructor-led, but they're instructor-paced. So it's down to the person who's doing the teaching to come up with the way that session is obviously paced. And again, this can either be online, in person, or hybrid, depending on what kind of model you're using. It's important to note at this stage that we're talking about synchronous and asynchronous learning as things that are not, that are married very closely within the context of our modules, because where we are delivering a lot of content online, the relationship between those synchronous and asynchronous sessions has to be absolutely clear to the students as well. Things like online Zoom workshops, group activities, and lectures are obviously what we're talking about in this case. So before we move on, what I wanted to do is get a few ideas with people about what they currently think. Before I go over some of the things that I think, just get a few ideas about what people currently think are the best ways to improve engagement with synchronous sessions. So I'm just going to share a whiteboard. So people should be able to write here using their whiteboard tool. So maybe we can just get a few people writing some things down. You can feel free to open microphones as well if you like, although that can sometimes involve everyone talking over each other. It's one of the problems with these Zoom sessions is when you get people to write things down, it turns into dead air, and there's this feeling that one person must say something all the time. So I'll let a few people write things down before I start talking. That's a very meta comment there.
Matt, could you clarify where the whiteboard controls are? There's some comments in the chat.
Yeah, you should. When your whiteboard pops up, you should see a strip, which is your whiteboard controls. I've never seen it not there, so I don't know why. If people ask,
just called annotate.
If you're in full screen mode, annotate.
Okay.
Under the view options menu, which is at the top of the screen.
Yeah, so I've never. Every time I've ever opened it, it's always just been there. So this is one of the wonders of Zoom, isn't it? So there's a few things here that are popping up that definitely. Thanks, Marta. There's a few things here that definitely ring true in terms of my experience as well. So it's annoying on this whiteboard because you can't move. Oh, hang on, yes you can. Sorry, just moving things over. There we go. So that things are a bit better. There we go. Yeah, so there's a few things on here which I think are really important, and actually things that I'm that I'm not talking about, which now you talk about it is something that actually I think is a really good idea. That somebody wrote here. Where are we? Hang on a sec. Oh, where's my little thing? There we go. This time to reflect. So I really like that, because one of the problems with these sessions is that there may not be time to reflect. And actually, obviously, when you have large groups, for example, and you don't, and you're trying to coordinate a session with a huge group, it can be really difficult for students to have that time to reflect. And actually, using things like breaks in the middle of a session can be really useful. Part of what I have tried to do within my synchronous sessions is keep them quite short, because I think having really, really long online sessions is just not, we all know, everyone in this room knows that the dread they feel when they see the dreaded 2-hour Zoom meeting, and I can't imagine it's any different for students. I mean, if they see a 2-hour online synchronous session, or dare I say it, 3 hours or whatever, that would raise dread. And when you think that there's also a lot of asynchronous activities, readings, short videos and stuff to watch, there's a real danger of kind of information overload, I think. And I don't know how useful it is really for students in that respect to really sort of engage with the session. I think there's loads of important stuff here. Breakout rooms are great. I mean, it's such a good function. I mean, we've had a lot of problems with breakout rooms, certainly in our school, because we've tried to preset them for tutorial things and stuff, and it just doesn't work, because students sign in with their private accounts, and then the breakout rooms don't work, and then you end up with people getting sent all over the place and all kinds of horrendous things going. And again, somebody's put here, why don't students interact in breakout rooms? I've worked for the Open University for about 20 years, and we've been using online tutorials for the Open University for about 10 of those years. And in all of those 10 years, I have never known students to interact in breakout rooms, because they, it's a bit of a kind of, we're just going to sit here and wait for someone else to say something. Sometimes you get lucky and you get a really chatty student who just wants to talk, and then other people start working. But obviously then what often happens is that you have to then go into all of those breakout rooms and say, come on then, get started. One way around that, and this works well if you've got a relatively small group, is to appoint a breakout room leader. If you appoint a breakout room leader, so someone who's actually the moderator of that room, then that person will usually start talking, because they feel like it's their job to do it, and that can often kick things off. But breakout rooms can be problematic, especially with students. And I think some students just don't feel confident enough to talk, and that's something we have to accept, unfortunately. Okay, great. So there's a lot of stuff in here that really kind of reflects what I'm just going to save that as well. Saved as ping. There we go. Cool. There we go. Right, cool. Okay, so I'm now going to go back to where I was before. Okay, so according to the research, obviously we've talked about the asynchronous already. According to research, there are various different things that impact on engagement. And obviously, there's been a lot of research done over this over the last year or two. Obviously, because technology is moving on, but obviously because of COVID, there was a bit of a sort of slurry, if you like. That's probably the wrong word, although some of it probably falls into that category of research on how best to maximise student engagement in synchronous sessions. So one thing that is obvious and something that we're all, I'm sure, aware of is trying to minimise technical issues. I think, the university made the decision to go with Zoom. I personally have found Zoom to be really good in terms of technical issues, in terms of minimising technical issues. I don't know, this is not the forum to have a big discussion about it, but I mean, in terms of the way that it works, Google Meet always had problems for me. It just kind of switches off halfway through all the time. Similar with WebEx, often WebEx freezes and I have to re-sign in all the time. And with large groups, it obviously didn't work. And of course, one of the big issues with one big thing with Zoom that we all really liked was the fact that we could use live video breakout rooms, which I think people were really keen on. So I personally have found Zoom to be pretty good. There are a few issues technically which we're, I think, nearly over now, but one of the this problem with the breakout rooms is one of those things, but that's hopefully something that is now being sorted. Minimizing distractions is really important. I think a couple of people actually wrote on the whiteboard this idea of having clear instructions. I think, especially with these synchronous sessions, trying to minimize distractions is really important. I always tell students at the beginning, this is what's going to come in this session. And hopefully that means that they won't have things on in the background, but obviously we don't really have any control over that. What I'm going to say about the bit in the green box, which is kind of what I have been thinking about, is and also to a certain extent the next part, which is interacting with the instructor. I think if you get this right, then actually that should also play the role of minimizing distractions, because it's a way of making sure that the students are engaged throughout the session. So by keeping it relatively short, and by making sure that the interaction with the instructor is a kind of constant thing and also an unreliable thing, which I'll explain in a minute, then that can really help. Obviously, there are other things like teaching style, so how engaging you are in terms of your online delivery, which, there are tricks, even if, you perhaps don't feel that you're the most engaging person for whatever reason. Some people feel that they are engaging, some people feel they aren't. There are certain tricks that one can use to try and make their sessions a bit more engaging. And also critically content. So again, quality versus quantity. And a really important thing that I've found is the perceived added value of the session. So that's really what we're going to talk about over the next few minutes. Okay, so in terms of the first one that I said I'd talk about, maximising interaction with the instructor, I always outline the session at the start and tell them what's coming. I also tell them that there will be interactive activities, as I have done for you guys, but I don't say when they're going to be, because then people think, if they think, well, okay, there's going to be half an hour of him rabbiting on, and then there's going to be an interactive activity, I might as well go back to playing, Call of Duty or whatever they're doing. Then obviously that's not ideal. So by saying that there will be activities, but we don't know when they are, then that means that they have to kind of keep tuned in, if you like, to see when that's going to be. So I often don't say when, but I do state that there will be interactive activities. And there might not be there might be at the end, but as long as you tell them there will be, then they tend to stay on it. Another thing that I do now, many of you may have found this, especially if you've got larger groups like I do, that asking for questions in the chat can be problematic in terms of the session. And actually, although you want to maximize interaction with the instructor, you also don't want to be in a situation where you're just sitting there staring at the chat box all the time. So what I tend to do is I ask for questions in advance. I don't know how many other people do this, but it allows you to make sure that you're addressing that student voice issue and that you are interacting, but you're doing it in a kind of planned way. So I have, this is just a clip from next week or whatever. So I have for the interactive session, it says what it is, and then I have a link to the forum, and the forum obviously pops up a sort of question answer forum, and then this person can then ask a question within that question and answer forum, and then I can go and address that within the session. This does have its own challenges associated. We've had one or two students that see that question and answer forum as their own kind of private kind of search engine, if you like, and have posted dozens and dozens of questions. So it's important to make sure that there are rules and regulations for it. What we do, I also have a question and answer archive, so that I can put stuff within the archive that people have asked before, so that people can check and see whether that question has already been asked. But it works pretty well. And it allows you to have that freedom to answer the questions that people have already posted. And people always do post stuff, in my experience. They may not on all modules, but they typically do. And then, you can use that to kind of structure that part of the session. And I think that's good, because then the other students feel like you're actually listening to what they're asking, and you're interacting with them, and you're not just kind of throwing information at them. So that seems to work pretty well, but also minimizes the issue of the chat box. So the next thing is the sort of teaching style. Now, this is a difficult one, because obviously, people have their own styles of doing things, and things don't always work well within an online environment. So there are a few sort of tricks that one can do, which seem to work quite well, or have worked quite well so far. I've said this a few times, and we did it today. Always start with a quiz. It doesn't matter what that quiz is. I use this thing called quizzes, which some of you might be familiar with. We used to have a Kahoot. It was free for a long time, but now they've changed Kahoot into not being free, and you have to pay for it. And I think you can only get about 30 participants doing the quiz without upgrading. Now, I use quizzes. I mean, I don't know what people thought of quizzes when they were doing the quiz, but I find it quite engaging as the person who's actually taking the quiz. I wouldn't use it for anything serious like exams or anything like that. You can use it for homework, which is quite good. So you can set them assignments if you want. I don't personally do this, but it can be done. Quizzes is good because you get up to 100 free participants. So you can get, if you've got a relatively moderate sized module, you can get 100 people free, and you don't lose a lot of the functionality with the free version. I personally, it's $60 a year for 300. I just pay for it because for me, the other thing about quizzes is that it's got tens of thousands of questions and quizzes already uploaded. So it's really easy to set up quizzes from pretty much any subject you can think of. And it's got all various different levels, right from kind of grade school all the way up to university level. And you can go in there and you can import questions from other people's quizzes, which means you haven't got to sit there for hours setting up quizzes. So it gives you that flexibility. And I think for $60 a year, for me, it was a no-brainer. And I have 300 odd students on my module, so I had to go for the large version. I would warn people that if you have got very large modules, often the live leaderboard thing, so the feedback to the person doing the quiz is not particularly good. I think because the system gets a bit overloaded, but the students seem to like it and it works for them. So, but anyway, that's what I personally use. But there are loads of other alternatives, and obviously we have, Nearpod and various other things that one can use for that. But the reason I always start with the quiz is, one, because I think the students quite enjoy it. I can put and it has got some learning potential because you can obviously ask questions that are relevant to the week. And it's also, as I mentioned before, you can download the report. I won't share it to you now, but you can download the report, and it gives you all kinds of really in-depth information about the performance of the individuals. And I then pop that onto the Moodle, and it's all anonymous and stuff, so they can see it and see how they got on. And it also obviously has all the answers. So that's a good way of kind of adding to their learning.
Couple of questions in the chat,
yeah,
Matt,
sure.
if that's okay, about quiz, just for clarification. There was one about whether you've encountered any issues with people using their phones to access it if they're already using them, say, to access the Zoom session, and also whether there are other options like using a QR code to log in. A few people have reported that it was a bit clunky to get into, but they liked the interface when they were in there.
Yeah, you can. I mean, there is a so the problem is there is a code, a link that you can put in the chat. But one of the reasons I use a quiz at the beginning is because if latecomers come in, then they can access it, and actually it doesn't disturb the rest of the session, and it means people aren't missing stuff. The problem is, obviously, if you put stuff in the chat and then people come in late, they don't see what's already been written in the chat, so they don't see the link. So that makes it slightly problematic. But yeah, it's not perfect by any means. I don't think there is. I mean, you could create a QR code, but it does a unique link every time you start it. So when you start the quiz, it creates that number, and then if you turn it off and start it again, it creates a brand new number. So it's not the same code every time, which is slightly irritating. But it is what it is. So it's not perfect, but I've found it works pretty well so far with sort of minimal issues. But again, I think the important thing, I use this one, but the important thing for me is that you have this this ability to start the session in a kind of slightly fun but also useful way in terms of learning, and it also gives you that opportunity to mop up the first 10 minutes where people are coming in late, where you're not having to sort of think back. I mean, I certainly, if I start a session and people come in late, I think, oh, I should probably go back over what I've already said. But anyway, so that's right. And obviously I don't record any of that. Okay, so another few little tips that works quite well. This is not stuff that I've made up. This is just stuff that I've read and things that other people have found work really well in terms of teaching style and being engaging. Use people's first names if you're answering on the chat box. I think that's a nice way of showing that you're kind of talking to them as individuals. Sounds obvious, but a lot of people don't do it. I think using some technology is good, but don't use too much technology. I think if you use too many different things within the sessions, like loads of different types of technology, it can get a little bit overwhelming. And I think people lose the plot as to what's going on. So I tend to keep that minimal. The poll function within Zoom is really useful, and the emoticons are good. I often get people to click emoticons just to show me that they can hear me and that they can understand what's going on, and to regularly give me thumbs up and stuff like that. But obviously when you're in a room with hundreds of people, it's not that straightforward. And obviously you can't see all of that when you're doing the when you're doing the online stuff either, so it's not quite so easy. It's also quite a good idea to, I often get them to put things in the chat, just throw in a few questions and stuff on the chat, and not necessarily monitor it, but just say, put your thoughts down in the chat as we go, just to say what you think. And then I might, if things slow down towards the end, I might go in and have a look at some of those. But again, if you keep it informal, then it's a way of keeping that interaction going, but without really sort of slowing down the session particularly. In terms of content, I'm massively in favour of quality over quantity. I think that we really have to be very careful to make sure that we don't overload the students with information. There is a danger that we are trying to do too much with the blended learning, in the sense that if people will spend a lot of time coming up with really excellent asynchronous activities. So really good, loads of videos, loads of readings and stuff like that. I know from initial student feedback that some modules or some people's materials have been a little bit overwhelming. And I think actually what we're doing is we're trying to give them as much as possible, because students will say, oh, we want more. But by doing that, because the modules are being kind of delivered via the Moodle, essentially, I think students are looking at it and getting completely overwhelmed with all the information, and it's this kind of the thumb scroll of death, or whatever they call it, where they're looking down and going, oh my god, I've got to go through all this stuff. If you then punctuate that with a really, really long synchronous session as well, then I think there's a danger of students becoming overwhelmed and unengaged. And one of the things that everyone's panicking at the moment is that people might not come back after Christmas if they're feeling like this whole situation is just too much for them. So I think quality over quantity is critical. What I try and do in the synchronous sessions, I don't use it for teaching new information. I use it for summarizing the key points from the week, from the asynchronous. So these were the really important points of the week, really making sure that those learning outcomes have been kind of driven home. And I also make sure that the students have perceived added value from that synchronous session. And the way I do that is by linking specifically to assessment. So I try in all of the sessions to say, look, this is the material that you've covered this week in the asynchronous. This is all the really important parts that you need to know, and this is how this is going to relate to your final or your midterm or whatever it is assessment. So that means that the students are engaged because they're listening, because they want to know, but they also understand then which bits of the asynchronous are critical for their understanding and which bits are maybe additional learning or whatever. And I think that's really important, because realistically you can't expect that 100% of the students are going to spend their entire time going through every single part of that asynchronous. You'll find, if you look at the statistics in the books, for example, that, it's like 80% will watch the whole way through video 1, and then it goes down to 70% for video 2 and 50% for video 3 and so on. So often the students aren't, they're not following all of those activities through. So you need to be cognizant of that. And I think linking within the assessment and talking about important materials in the synchronous sessions can really help make sure that they know what they need to do. I think that it's important also to talk about how the students should use the content of the synchronous sessions for revision purposes and also for maximising their learning. So again, I talk about this, I've already mentioned, how does this week's material link to the assessment, and talk about which learning outcomes are being addressed and how the synchronous session is kind of linked into that, and then how the assessment will be done within that week's materials. So I use it as instead of new learning, it's a way of kind of bolstering their knowledge of the week's materials. Another thing that I always do in synchronous sessions is try and end on a slightly lighter note, in the sense that just for the students' interest, I tend to do this thing called This Week in, I do neuroscience. So the extent to which you do it depends on the year of study. So if it's like third years, you might do something a bit more detailed. But I always just grab a story from the, from the science press or journal article that's been published that's interesting or whatever, and do This Week in whatever that is. So, just to get the students thinking about it. And I often have that as a kind of open activity, like a chat box type activity or a whiteboard activity, just to make sure that, the students are engaging with it. So that's always how I end the sessions, and that makes sure that people stay to the end then. And then if they want to leave early because they've got something else to do, they know it's not absolutely critical that they stay. So it means that people, if they want to get off or whatever, for whatever reason, or they've had enough, then they can leave and they're not going to miss anything really important. So what I want to do now is have another little whiteboard activity about challenges. So this is something that I really think, it's important to, there we go, I'm going to clear that. And we can start again. So I think it's really important to have some ideas about what the challenges are. So this could be things that, people have found challenging about synchronous activities, or things that, you can perceive as being challenges based on either what I've said or any other ideas that people have had that we might be able to address within this session. So maybe we could open up the floor for that.
Just while people are posting things to the whiteboard, there have been a few questions in the chat, Matt. There was a question from Marta about setting up synchronous sessions a week after asynchronous material. So anything you can say about timing, and also about how it fits with the Moodle template, what you've been doing.
So the Moodle template bit first, the way it fits is that, in the sort of interactive session, it's simply you just put that as the group interactive session, and then have the link to the Zoom session in there. And then I write within it that, we're going to cover the week's materials, and then in the session I tell them what's coming up. But because all the sessions have been the same and I've done them the same every week, they kind of know what to expect now. So it fits within the Moodle template in the sense that we're going over what's been covered in the week, but just in a much kind of less detail, and in terms of these are the key points for the week. And I think for me, that's what's absolutely critical, because if you basically just use that 1 hour, 2 hour session to essentially give a long lecture which incorporates all of the stuff from the week, then you're just repeating information. And for me, the students aren't really going to get anything from that session, because the whole point of having the asynchronous in blocks is so that they can do it at their own pace. And if you then just chuck it all in one block, then that's not at their own pace, that's at your pace. And then that doesn't give the opportunity for them to learn from it particularly well. They can then go back and listen to it, but what's the point if you've already done it in the blocks, if that makes sense. What was the other part of the question? Sorry, Stuart.
About the timing. Someone was suggesting they do the asynchronous one week and the synchronous is to follow up in the following week. So
so again, that's another reason why I make it a summary of what's come, because there may be bits of they might fall on the Monday, they might fall on the Friday or the Wednesday of the week that session is. Because of the way that my module's set out, in that there's 3 or 4 people that teach on it, it has to be on that week, because otherwise it would get impossibly complicated for timetabling. So the way we've done it is that, again, the content from that week's asynchronous is what will be covered in the synchronous, but again, it's saying these are the important things from this week, and then signposting back to the asynchronous activities. Now, there is, you could argue, well, there's a danger that they're just going to ignore everything that's not the important parts, but that's their prerogative, right? If they don't want to read all of it, then they don't have to. If you tell them the important parts and say that everything else is there to sort of bolster their knowledge, then it's up to them if they want to read it all or they want to engage with it. But it then gives them that opportunity to know which parts are important for them to look at. And, by rights, some students will go out and read on their own anyway. You don't need to tell them, they'll go out and read about it anyway. So you have to account for both sorts of students, or all sorts of students in that respect. Is that all right, Marta? I can't see you, unfortunately. I can see 3 people on my screen and they're all crushed in the corner.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Yes, that's good. I thought it just gives them the opportunity to actually cover the material before the session, because as you said, we might be teaching on Monday or Friday, and I tend to use my session as kind of a revision. So if they haven't looked at the material, then they don't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I think that's sort of the point, really, is that if it was done that all of the sessions were, so 2 things. One, if you do all the teaching week to week, then that works well, right? Because then you say, last week I talk about this week and so on, or this week I talk about last week and so on. But when it's split up between different people, it gets really hard to do that, because they're then in the middle of learning about something else. And if that session happens to fall on a Thursday of the subsequent week, and they've just done the whole week talking about that week, and then what I mean, it starts to, I think, for the students, a lot of them are already kind of confused by a lot of things anyway. Lots of modules are working at different paces, and again, as I've said before, some of the modules, I know because I've looked at a lot of Moodle sites, have got an enormous amount of content, and students are quite conscientious generally. I think they feel like they have to look at all of it. So it can get a bit overwhelming. And if the subjects are jumping back and forth, if there isn't that clear linear progression, I think that can cause more confusion. So I personally tend to have the synchronous session within that week. Even if it was on the Monday, I would still have it relevant to that week's material. And again, the way that I then deal with that, I guess, is by having it, these are the highlights from this week, these are the really important parts. It's all of this is in more detail on the activities for the week. Okay, right, let's have a look at the whiteboard, what we got. Students, so this is the old one, isn't it? Is that the students waiting for the recording and don't engage initially. I think, that's part of the reason why I try and make these sessions as interactive as possible, because once the students realise that the recording is actually kind of not as interesting or informative as being there, then they're more likely to do the session. But at the end of the day, we have to accept that if the student doesn't want to turn up when you're doing it, then they can just listen back to the recording, as I'm sure people will do to this session today. But we all know if you don't turn up to it, it is less interactive because you're not involved with it. But I don't really know that there's a huge amount we can do about that, unfortunately. It's a challenge, but it's a challenge that we just have to sort of suck it up, I think, unfortunately. The trying to get students to turn their cameras on and use their microphones is a huge challenge as well. I mean, especially in the group sessions. To be honest, in the small sessions, the camera thing's a bit of a difficult one, because some universities and some places I know are going audio only, because you know, there are lots of issues associated with cameras and what might be in the background or what might not be in the background. And I think some students might feel quite an invasion of privacy, as well as some of us probably do as well. You know, you having random people who you don't know looking around your living room while you're talking to them and stuff like that. So the cameras is a bit of an odd one. I mean, we obviously here we've decided that we're going to have cameras on, but I know, again, I say I've worked for the Open University for years. The policy is cameras off because, you know, we talk to each other, but we don't have cameras on. So, I mean, I think it's down to personal taste, really. You know, some people just don't want to be gawped at and feel like, you know. I think there's also a sort of concern about, you know, people are concerned about using cameras on their computers anyway, aren't they? Because of people hacking in and so on. So I don't know. But the microphone one, I always try and encourage people to talk, but if they don't want to, then they can just use the chat box, right? It's not that big a deal. Yeah, so there's a really interesting comment here actually, which really does kind of ring true to me, which I'm just going to, this one here. But this is really hard, right? Because, you know, that's another reason why I like using that quizzes thing, because it tells you how many people are logged in at any time. And people, pretty much everyone does it. I mean, it's, you know, out of 300 odd people, you normally get 220, 230 at least doing it. And you know how many people have done it because it's all up there. So actually, and also otherwise they just have to sit there doing nothing. And I think a lot of them just want to do it. So that's quite a good way of gauging how interactive, but I'm sure everyone has noticed, this is another issue with using a chat box, is that you'll have 2 or 3 people that just monopolize it and just write stuff all the time. And then nobody else does anything. So for all you know, you're really only teaching 3 people. So, I mean, a good way around that is obviously by using the poll system, but you do need to set it up in advance. But, you know, I don't know that like just constantly doing polls and quizzes and stuff like that all the way through is always the best way to go. You know, I think getting feedback from the students about what you're talking about is important. But if you do too many polls and too many quizzes, then I think the students would feel like they hadn't really been told anything, that it was all just them feeding back. And I think you'd find that students would not find that as engaging or as useful. But, you know, I could be wrong, but I think that's the impression I get. The one about students not doing prior VLE preparation, do you mean by that the, you know, they haven't looked at the module materials yet, the activities? I don't know who wrote that. Maybe they could unmute.
That was me. Yeah, that they don't do the prior VLE preparation, that they don't look at the materials beforehand, then they just show up to the session and they cannot participate at all. Yeah, no, of course. I mean, again, so, you know, rightly or wrongly, and I don't know whether this is the right way of doing it, but that's very specifically why I don't, because I think if you get people, if you say in order to do this synchronous session, you must have done the reading for the week, you put yourself in this slightly precarious situation whereby if they haven't done it, then they just won't participate. They might turn up, and then some people will do it and some people won't. But that's why I try and make the sessions linked to the materials for the week, but don't actually say you can't do this until you've done the materials for the week, if that makes sense. And I think really it's not just because of the engagement thing, it's also because of the fact that, as I said before, that, you know, timetabling wise, sometimes it's on a Monday, Friday, Wednesday, you just can't, you know, especially with large groups, it changes all the time. So I try to make it clear that we will be going over the week's materials and telling them the important parts, but not saying I'm going to kind of test you on what's gone on this week or anything like that. Because I just think a lot of them just would think, well, I haven't done it, so there's no point in turning up. So that can then impact on your attendance as well. Yeah, so this one, just before I move on, because we're nearly out of time and I just want to finish off, this one, silence after asking for something, you know, this dead air situation, it's really uncomfortable and unpleasant and I can't stand it. And you're like, so tell me, what do you think about, you know, whatever, and then you sit there staring at the chat and nothing happens. And it's really quite unpleasant and uncomfortable. And that's why, again, with the questioning part of it, I tend to say, ask your questions in advance, because then if nobody's got any questions in advance, then that's absolutely fine. And I don't even go over that session. I just say there weren't any questions, so we'll move on. And then at the end,
I will then ensure that there's a couple of minutes for any questions on the chat. And then if people want to leave, I can stop the recording and just have the chat, and any questions that pop up, I'll deal with them right at the end. So that's the only way I can think of as dealing with that. But if anyone's got any better ideas for dealing with silence, you know, maybe having the countdown music playing or something, I don't know, something, you know. Okay. Excellent. Right. Let me just go back to the thing. So I guess really just to kind of round up, because we're basically out of time, or we're nearly out of time, and then we'll have a couple of minutes for discussion at the end, or not, as the case may be. So really, in terms of what I guess the summary is, and what I've kind of tried to get from all these synchronous sessions, is what we're trying to do is not only you know, increase the sort of pedagogical side of things, but we're also trying to promote a sense of belonging. You know, I don't want to try and sound too fluffy about this, but we really are trying to make the students feel like they are part of the institution. So where they, you know, wherever they are, whether they're on campus or off campus or at home or whatever, we want them to feel like they belong within these sessions. And I think having good synchronous sessions that really are interactive and really build that engagement is absolutely essential for allowing the students to have that sense of belonging. So in terms of things to minimize and maybe to think about, I think trying to minimize kind of unnecessary content, lots of repeating of stuff that's come during the week. I think, you know, that's something that we should probably try to minimize, because I don't think students find it very useful. And also it's a kind of waste of effort, because I think that ultimately then there's confusion between asynchronous and synchronous, and not really understanding what the synchronous part is for. And obviously the things to maximize, really what we've talked about already, you know, making sure there is active involvement from the students, but also thinking about what the rationale is. What is the point of that synchronous session? And the more I think we think about what the rationale is, and whatever that may be, you know, I know what mine is getting across the key points for the week so that the students are prepared for how we're going to assess them, and making sure that they understand the learning outcomes for the week and how best to learn from what I've given them. And that's really what I try and cover in all the synchronous sessions. And I think the students understanding the added value of the synchronous sessions over the asynchronous, so it's not just an additional thing, it's added value, really helps to make sure that the sessions go really well. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to stop sharing, and we have about 2 minutes. So I'm assuming that I'll be cut off in my prime, but I don't know if anybody's got any kind of questions or anything they wanted to say or mention or criticize. Please do. I love criticism. I feed off hatred.
Just to say that our sessions after lunch break, so at 1:45, are going to be sort of group discussions, what are called Cracker Barrel sessions, workshopping exactly the kind of things that in some of the groups that Matt's been talking about. So if anyone does have any burning ideas they want to share, there will be another chance in half an hour as well.
I did have a question. I think it's annoyingly, it's probably more private than public one would be good. But yeah, I was just curious to see, because it sounds like you've got a really good measure from your experience of what is the right amount of content. I'd be curious to see what too much looks like, because as a sort of third party person to support teachers more than making it, it's quite interesting. I don't know if I'm not sure I've got the concept of where that ceiling is, if you know what I mean. But maybe it's probably, you almost name and shame people, so
I wouldn't dream of doing that. No, it's more the I mean, dare I say, you'll know it when you see it, but I think it's the problem is, so I was before, you know, like a few years ago, I was the student voice coordinator, and so I had these meetings with students all the time, and one of the things that students often said was there's not enough material. And at first I thought, well, what do you mean? What does that actually mean? When you dig down into it, what do you want? Do you want, do you want different types of material? Do you want more of the same type of material? And when you actually drill down into it, what students really want is they want information about what they need to know. And it sounds really obvious, but they don't often, there's often this enormous block of information, and they can't know all of it, right? Whatever background anyone in this room is from, you do not know your entire subject back to front. So which bits of it do they need to know? And I think we're really bad at telling students what they need to know. So I think too much information is where you've just got this, enormous block of information, which might well be everything that is important about the subject, but you have to be mindful of the fact that they can't learn all of that. You're probably not going to test them on all of that. And if you are, then, you probably need to rethink the way you're assessing the students. So I think what I really try and do with in mind is, the information that you give them opportunities to read beyond it. And so it's saying, okay, look, here is the critical information that you must know for this subject. This is important. And that's what you get with your learning outcomes and, then more slightly directed learning outcomes for an individual session. Then it's like, this is the detail of this, and this is what you must know. Then after that, it's like, if you want to know a bit more about this, or you want to read around it, here's an opportunity for you to read around it. And I tend to find that the depth of that reading around it is dependent on what level they're at. So level 4, it'd be a little bit more textbooky based. Level 5, it might be some sort of review type articles. This is in science, so it might not be the same for everyone. And then for level 4 textbook, level 5 kind of more journal articles, review articles. Then level 6 would be more kind of primary research. So that's how I tend to do it. And then you make sure that they have enough different types of information, because I think that's what the students really mean, is you have some video, some audio maybe, some reading, and then some quizzes. And just make sure that they all kind of complement each other rather than just constantly adding to it, if that makes sense. So I think, to answer your question, it is a bit of an individual thing, and it's not something that there's just an answer like 32 slides is perfect and 33 is too much. It doesn't really make any sense. But I think, it's listening to the students, understanding what they want based on experience, and then really looking at, is it clear to them exactly what I want them to know? Does that make sense?
I think that's a nice point to leave it on. Unfortunately, we're going to have to finish the session there, but thank you, Matt. I really enjoyed that. I think most people find it very valuable, and a mixture of the very practical and lived and also the sort of bigger picture. So thank you for that. As I say, our next sessions start again at 1:45, so please come along for those. I believe if anyone wants to have a more informal lunch break, that there's a space available to do that as well if you go over to the website. So thank you again, Matt. You're getting lots of the little clapping things. I'll give you an actual clap because I'm unmuted myself.